Welcome to the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Join us here every Saturday night at 8 o'clock, or listen to our podcast anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, just to name a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where independent new authors come first. You want to write a book. You've got ideas to share, an experience maybe, but you feel paralyzed by your own insecurities or obstacles, whatever they are. Well, there's no shortage of first-time authors who have overcome what may seem like insurmountable odds to get their books published. And Ashray Jha is no exception. He's the author of So You Want to Be a Super Investor? Learn how to invest like the best. All right, let's talk about how you got here.
There's a lot of stuff. So I want to talk about that all my life aspects that really kind of helped me get to this point.
Okay.
So I had an older sister who had Rett syndrome. So Rett syndrome is a very rare genetic disorder that primarily affects girls. And so as an infant, the child develops normally, but then soon starts regressing and losing all their motor functions. So seeing this as part of my childhood, that really kind of instilled in me that fact that whatever I do, I need to make an impact and I need to help people. And so as a kid, like I had a very active lifestyle. I would play basketball, go to soccer, swimming, and do karate. But then, unfortunately, when I was 10 years old, I was diagnosed with a benign brain tumor, and that affected in the cerebellum. And so after the surgery, that affected my coordination and balance. So I lost all my muscle mass, my muscle tone, anything that requires coordination like speech, typing, and writing that I had to regain. So it was a very, physically it was tough to regain all that. But just going from like having a very athletic lifestyle to not being able to do anything that I was able to do when I was a kid, that was also very emotionally taxing. And there are times that like I really just wanted to give up, but seeing like my parents, both my mom and dad, and how they dealt with this with my sister and with me, and they never took the easy way out or anything. That kind of instilled in me that I have to keep on going. And there is like a narrative out there that like people think like if there's disabilities or something that they can't do everything. So that's why I really wanted to change the narrative and just prove it to myself and everyone that no matter what challenge you're going through, there's always something you can do to make an impact.
But yet you still have this understanding of how the stock market works.
So that's more research. And so like I always had this passion in investing. From my dad, he was a big part of it. So like I'd say like when I was around like 3-4 years old, he would always come home, he would watch the nightly business news, and then he would spend time and I would be watching a show with him afterwards called Supermarket Sweep. So at that time, I really didn't understand anything about the stock market or what was going on with that. So then what was going on? But I did have the inquisitive nature and I started asking him questions. So he did start explaining stuff to me. And so that was the end of that for there. But then when we came back to like in 8th grade, that's when we started playing the stock market game in school. That's when I started also learning a lot about investing and how to go about doing that. But that time it was just a hypothetical portfolio. It really a light bulb kind of went off for me was when I started working. I had my own portfolio, and then 2020 was the first time I was in charge of handling my own portfolio, and we saw the market drop. And that's where I really wanted to figure out what was going on and the research. So I don't think it's more of the intellect. I think it was more of just my determination and being like, this is a problem. I need to figure it out no matter what. So like I started this during the pandemic where I always had a passion about investing from when I was at a young age. I always like learning about investments and the competitive business landscape. So once we got to once I started working and I was in charge of making my own personal portfolio, I basically put few companies that I like, and then all the concepts that I learned in going through school and everything, I use that to make the rest of my portfolio. Now, however, when I saw that when we saw the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 and the subsequent market downturn, my portfolio value was cut in half. So I was left nervous and scared of like what is actually going on and what is happening. And I realized that like we did see a recession in 2008. So I know this is going to happen again and again in the future, but I want to be prepared for the next time. So that's when I really just started doing the research, and I was just putting it in my own notes and seeing how it does. And it worked out really well for me. So then I was like, well, I need to get this out there and like help as many people as I can. So that's what really why I really wanted to write the book.
So your book is So You Want to Be a Super Investor, Learn How to Invest Like the Best. What do the Warren Buffetts of the world know that we don't know, the little people?
So that's the thing. Like when I started doing the research during the pandemic, that's when I thought that I started doing the same questioning, like, okay, how do the best investors, like all these super investors, what do they do in the times of adversity? Like, what makes Warren Buffett much better than us at investing? Like, why is he so great and I'm just skating by? What's his secret sauce? And then, like, is it because he has so much more money? Can he like do things that we can't do? And when I came across my research, I found that the most important thing that he does was the unconventional thinking. It wasn't the amount of money. So with the unconventional thinking, and I saw that I came across that many of his disciples, the other people that are called super investors, they all follow similar principles put their own twist of the unconventional thinking. And with that unconventional thinking, like it strays from what we found typically with in the typical literature, where it's either like it can come off like it's a sales pitch, or there's other literature that is like insightful but it's very monotonous and dry. So I figured like let me really just buckle down, see what he is saying and what are the super investors doing and how is that helpful. And so that's why in I I hit upon like using my own examples to relate. The main point of my book I talk about is compounding and holding investments for the long term. So like right now in the media, whenever there's something that happens in the market, we see that there's a lot of analysis in the media, and that can be very confusing to investors. So what I found is that all these macro events, like we can never predict what is going to happen or how long that's going to happen. So then I said that instead of worrying about the macro stuff, I should focus on what I can control, and what I can control is my understanding of certain businesses and what they do, and then what I learned from going through the super investors is about compounding investments and holding from the long term. So that's one thing that I talk about.
So you got to stay in for the long term. You can't buy something and then expect to make a fortune, in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. It's more like many years.
Yeah. That's what I'm getting at, because there's really no magic pill in investing where you can do something for one day and then magically you're gonna make a fortune off of it. So that's why it's really more about consistency, being consistent, and just sticking with it. Once you really understand the business and you want to buy part of the company's stock, that's when you hold it for the long term and don't worry about what's going on in the economy. And that's when you'll see the maximum result.
Somebody should do a story on you because you've overcome incredible odds to get where you are. Would you consider yourself a successful investor?
I consider myself successful, but not my head's in the clouds where I think oh, I'm the greatest. There's a lot of people I can learn from, and so it's just like life where I have to keep at it with my physical aspects to make improvements every day. That's the same thing with investments. I have to keep at it every day to make improvements. And then hopefully one day me and all the readers we can join the ranks of the super investors. That's the ultimate goal, right?
It is. It is. You have a very inspirational story.
Thank you.
You going to keep writing?
Yeah. That's my plan. My plan is to make a series of this, because right now this is the beginning and the intro, but through various stages of life, there's going to be different changes of how to invest. Say right now, since I'm fairly young, I'm in my 30s. It's much different than when I'm planning for retirement. So that's what my thing is right now, to have this one out there, get the feedback from people, see what they like, what they want more of before I start going into the second book, and then addressing those questions and updating them on my life.
Great. What a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. And I hope that with my book that people will get the message out there that no matter what challenge they're dealing with or hardship, that they can overcome anything. And two, I'm hoping that other people can gain the insights from the book, and they can see me as the tour guide that's guiding them throughout this journey.
I wish you the best of luck. Yep. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Howard Stern fans know all about his wife, Beth, and her work as an animal rights activist. Our next author, Jill Eileen, got to know her pretty well when Beth posted on Instagram about a cat so horribly abused, no one knew if he would make it. The story inspired Jill's book entitled Ernest George Gets a Home.
I started this project back in 2018. We had Ernest George about 6 months ourselves, so that put him a little over a year by the time I started writing it, and just loved him so much. And I've always had a heart for animals growing up, and his story was so sad. And if it wasn't for Beth Stern there in New York on Instagram, I wouldn't have been able to adopt him. That's how I discovered him. She was posting on behalf of someone she knew in Southern California. I was crying reading his story on Instagram. My husband's like, what's wrong? And I read the story to him, and he's like, put in an application right now. And we already had a cat, and we treated him like he was one of our human children. And so I just did everything I could possible to kind of get ahead of the pack for application consideration, and sent a screenshot of my husband and I FaceTiming with our other cat, because we do that. We're crazy parents. And before you know it, so I was chosen as one of the finalists. I went and met him, and his story is just really sad. I summarized it for the story because I didn't want to traumatize children. But when he was found he was about 6 months old. He was born in a feral colony, and his foster mom, she's like family to me now, she would go out and feed them. And some feral cats just never want to become domesticated. They like to stay outside, but she'd make sure that they were fed, had water. And it was pouring rain on Valentine's Day back in 2017. And she had seen him and his litter mates shortly after they were born. So she saw him grow up. And so she went out to feed his bunch. They kind of stick to the same area. And he was always the first to greet her. And she always remembered him because he's half Maine Coon. So he's got this enormous amount of like long fur, and he was fluffy and very friendly and not feral like his siblings. So she always remembered him. And when she went out, it was pouring rain Valentine's Day in 2017. And she went out to go feed them all and make sure they had boxes and things like that to get shelter from the rain. And he never came out, and she got worried. So she started searching for him, calling him by the nickname she gave him. She started to walk back to her car, which was probably a couple blocks away at this point. Something, an instinct, God's word, you name it, told her to look back. So she turned around, and in the field that she had just come across, she sees what she thought was a dog crawling, like pulling itself towards her. She could tell it was struggling. So she went back because she loves all animals as well, only to find out it was him. And his back legs were wire tied together down, and it had cut through down to the bone. His fur had been shaved, and he was dipped in motor oil.
What?
Yeah.
Somebody did that to him.
Somebody did that to him. And he has no business liking humans. And he is one of the most friendly, smart. I've grown up with all sorts of animals, especially cats, but I've also had dogs. He is one of the smartest, most friendly, lovable, human-like cats I've ever had. He has no business liking humans after what was done to him.
What?
So,
I don't understand that at all. So she was able to rescue him in that state?
Correct. Well, because he knew her. He's known her since he was born, because she was always out there feeding them.
That's
She would
right.
pet them, and so all animals do not ever forget a smell. They know. So he knew he had heard her, because she calls him when she comes up. It's like he knew her car, everything, because he would always come out and greet her every time she'd come. And this time he didn't. And so she called the police right away. Thankfully, the law had already passed that it's federal or felony to hurt any animal. The police came, and then they started patrolling the area. They were going to take him to the shelter. And she said, no, I'm going to take him into my home. I will get him vet care and take care of it. So she reached out to Beth Stern over Instagram. This was before Beth had a ton of followers that she has now. And Beth responded to her, said, I know some pro bono vets in the area. Let me get you connected with them. So Jesse took him in, and they were even the vet wanted him after he healed, more or less after his spirit healed. They knew he would heal, but he was about a day shy of having to have his back legs amputated.
Oh my God. So how did you end up hooking up with Beth Stern?
I followed Beth on Instagram because my Oscar looked like her Yoda, and she wrote a book about Yoda.
Right.
And I just loved it. And I'm a cat freak, and I know they also had English bulldogs, just like my husband and I used to have. So I just started following her profile. She posted a story, warned everybody, get out your tissues. And I started reading the story. Sure enough, my eyes were welling up. I'm not a big crier in the normal life, but when it comes to animals, it doesn't take much. And she said, I'm posting this for my Southern California people, because Beth's very firm. She's not going to fly a cat clear across the country. If you want to adopt local, she's very good about, standing her ground with that. Well, he was local to me. And because Jesse had reached out to her saying, what do I do? How do I do this? And Beth guided her through, you need to bring him inside. Do not let him back outside. Get him vet care, and then keep him until his spirit's healed. That's what's got to heal the most, is his spirit, because he might be afraid of people, you name it. And he was afraid of the vet. He was hissing, and this cat's never hissed in his life since we've had him. He was hissing and scratching, but yeah, I would be too. especially when they were removing the wire tie or that plastic wire tie. So that was that. So I saw that. She put Jesse's email. If you want to apply, email this. So I emailed Jesse, and after about 3 or 4 days, she contacted me back and said that she had picked me and about 10 other people. And I think she was just testing the waters to see how we would react. So she invited people to come to her place to meet him first.
Okay.
And a lot of people said they weren't going to. They just thought they could just come pick him up and take him. So I said, sure. Took the day off. I took my son with me. It was about a 2-hour drive, roughly, just because of Southern California traffic. I took a cat carrier with me, one of my existing ones, with my 2 cats' scent in there, so I could know, so he could be introduced to their scent before he even came home with us.
Right.
He was hiding under her bed and he wouldn't come out. Nick and I, that's my son. He's the little boy in the story. He and I laid on our stomachs. We just talked to him. We'd stick our hands under there, let him smell us. And Jessie was apologetic. First of all, she was like, I can't believe he's not coming out. I promise you, he's very friendly. And it didn't faze myself or my son. Like, we know, we get it, but he doesn't know us yet. He knows you. So I offered to leave my carrier. She hadn't made a decision yet who she was going to give him to, but I said, just keep my carrier so he can get used to all of our scents. And if you choose me, great, then we can pick him up and you already have the carrier. If you don't, then I'll just arrange for another time to come get it. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And but by that night, she was crying at tears of happiness, just watching how patient we were. We stayed at her place for hours, just trying to coax him out and not getting turned off by the fact that he wouldn't run to us.
Right.
Because he was afraid. And she was crying, and she just knew at that moment that this is his home. So she called me up that night and she said, he's yours. And I said, great. Well, we are about to go on vacation. I hate to do this to you. I'll give you money for food or whatever, but can you keep him for 1 more week? And then when I get back, that way I don't want to have him here and then we leave him.
Yeah, right.
So she said, fine. And that was that. The rest is history. And Jessie has since become like family to my husband and I. We've taken in 2 more of her fosters. One of them, unfortunately, we did have to euthanize last fall, but they were elderly. They were older.
Right.
But they were feral and we made them domestic. We just had never expectations of them ever becoming lap cats, because one of them would hiss and claw and scratch. We got past that and now she sleeps with us on the bed. But Ernie was just very inspiring for me because of how badly he was traumatized and how wonderful of an animal he is. And so I wanted to write a story about him, and that's where we're at. I really want parents to read this to their kids, or kids that are starting to learn how to read, start to ask questions about what's adoption, what's fostering, kind of get that awareness out there.
Right. What's the story that you came up with?
It was just really telling the story I told you, but a lot less detail. Jessie's a little girl in the story. And when she's on her way home, she hears some meowing and is curious, so she runs to it. And right before she finds the cat, I do mention that she's somebody who loves animals and has always wanted a pet of her own. She doesn't have one. So she sees Ernest George in a box. Of course, that's not his name, but she just sees him and she sees he's in bad shape. So she brings him home. And her parents agree to let her foster them. They did not say, no, we could keep him, but they wanted to see how responsible she could be. So they agreed, and they got vet care. I didn't really go into detail on that at all. Because again, the target age is ages 3 to 7.
Okay.
Got to keep it simple and not traumatizing for them. So Ernie got vet care, and Jessie played with him and got him cat toys. And you can see how he's warming up to her. And in the book, the illustrations, I made sure that they had him like some shaved spots, and he looked dirty and matted, that kind of thing. And so when his spirit, as I say, was healed, when he was ready to go, she posted on social media to try to find him another home. And then in comes our family. I don't name my husband or myself, but we're not the subject of the story. It's really about Jessie and Ernie. So we come, and Ernie went right up to my son and started rubbing on him, and Jessie knew that was his home. So the rest is history. And the book ends with showing a picture of my son playing with him with his cat toys, and he's all happy. So it's a very short, succinct, but it'll hopefully raise some questions from kids in a good way.
So I'm assuming this book is all over your social media, right?
I've got friends that were sharing the word. And of course, Fulton Books has a PR team. So they just did the press release probably about a month ago, perhaps, and they put it on different outlets
Okay.
that are targeted towards certain audiences, things that will show up in search engines as well. And again, just word of mouth, just amongst my own social crowd. And then they are almost finished. They will make the same PR team builds a social networking site dedicated to the book.
That's wonderful. I bet you can't wait to read this book to some little kids.
I can't wait. Well, my husband and I are going to be grandparents come June. Now, granted, that will be too soon to read to our grandchild, but my son, I gave him a copy already, but he can't wait to read that to his soon-to-be son or daughter when they can start being of that age.
Great. You going to keep writing?
I think so. I want to see if this is successful. I've already got a second one written about Ernest George. I feel like it's kind of like chronicles of him because he's got so many fun quirks and personality traits.
Okay.
And we've also rescued a tortoise. So I think one of those books will be Ernest George Gets a Tortoise.
Where did the name Ernest George come from?
So all of my animals, I treat them like family. So I pick human names for them. They all get first and middle because they get in trouble just like we do. And that's what I do when my son was in trouble. He'd get first and middle named. You knew you were busted if you got middle named.
Right.
And I pick names, and I don't want to offend anybody whatsoever, but I pick names that I would not have chosen to name my own children.
Okay.
So I want them to be there, and then it fits them. I mean, I have an Eloise LaRue, and I have a Myrtle Louise.
Okay.
I try to go with those older generation names that we heard, and I don't know about you, but right. I would think much older person when I was little, when I'd hear these names.
Right.
So Ernest George, it just came to me, and I stuck with it.
Great. Jill, thanks so much for talking to me today.
My pleasure. I hope you have a wonderful day.
The Texas Toad has arrived. Couple of decades in the making, Lawrence S. Rominger brings him to life to teach us all a lesson. Lawrence, tell me, what preceded the Texas Toad?
I've always written. So my kids are a band, Castaway Radio. They're a professional band. They play around this area and stuff. And so I've always helped them lyrically. And I just have always liked writing. My dad was a really good writer. And I guess I just sort of picked it up from him. And it's just one of those things that if you do it, you know. And I always laugh. People are like, oh, what books do you read? And I'm like, I don't like read. I'd rather write a book than read one.
And then somewhere along the way, you graduated to writing children's books. How did that happen?
Okay, so when I used to have to read bedtime stories to the kids in Missouri, so they were both about 3 and 5, I had to read books to them, and they would insist upon a lot of times the same book over and over again. And some of these books were just not good. They disturbed me to keep reading it to them, and they insisted upon it. So I was telling my friend at work, I was like, man, I could write a better book than this. And he's like, well, you write it, I'll draw it. And so I was standing in line in St. Louis airport getting ready to fly out with TWA. So you're always standing around when you're flying TWA. And I just started writing the lyrics for Texas Toad. You know, I didn't change a word of it. It's been the same since I wrote it 20 years ago. And so I finished writing the book, and then, you know, career change and stuff like that. We moved around, and Jim, the artist, was in Missouri with me. He actually even came down and worked for me in Texas. So we finished 98% of the book, but then he had to go. He left. And so I didn't have a couple of the drawings, and I just didn't do anything with it. And it was something that the kids knew because I read it to them all the time. When they were little, but I didn't finish it really until last year, to properly finish it.
With all the drawings and all the special touches.
Yes, yeah. Because it's when you're doing rhymes and things like that, it's a back and forth process anyway, because you'll end up editing your own work 250 times to get it where you want it. It's just not something that always just flows out.
You know, it's funny that you sat on it so long. Was that frustrating?
Yeah, no.
No, because you just kind of went on with your life and things went along.
You know, it became about the kids, and you know, and then when they became a band, I mean, so I was all in to help them. I ran sound for them and stuff like that. So I was getting a lot of my creative release out anyway, not vicariously through them, but just, you know, I was satisfied with everything that was going on. And what happened is people would keep, come in the house and they pick it up and look at it and goes, oh man, this is great. And then I was like, well, okay, maybe I need to go ahead and finish this thing. So it sort of just became a bucket list kind of thing to finish it. And coming up on retirement, I knew I was going to retire this year. So I was like, well, you might as well finish that and get that done. So I finished it when I was 60. So at least I hit some kind of milestone.
There you go. There you go. And then you not only finished it, you published it.
Published it, and I wrote another one. Yeah. So the concept of it is, when you read the book, it doesn't take long to read for an adult. I mean, it takes 4 minutes to read the book, but it's meant to be a reader between kids and adults. That was what I designed it for. But then it turned out to be a little bit more informative than I even realized, because we weren't from Texas. I knew about the Don't Mess with Texas, but the book is essentially about a bad guy and a good guy, and the bad guy's a litter bug and the good guy's going to go after him. So the message resonates in Texas. In fact, we're going to be contacting and working with the Don't Mess with Texas campaign to see if this is something they'll get behind. And if so, that's, that could just help breathe more attention to it. But there's a critter, this is the state amphibian of Texas, is the Texas toad. And then there's a story about it. So that theme is carried over to the other books. So there's 2 other books already. One's written and the other's in draft. And they're both different states, different characters, and they're places that we've lived. So we kind of know a lot about those things. So it's easier to write when you have, a reason to write it. And kind of look forward to doing that and take it as far as I can take it. So the story, Texas Toad, basically it's a fable of good versus evil. It's the story of an unsuspecting, respectable, and dedicated law toad who takes on the nastiest of nasty flies, Fred Fly. He's a litter bug criminal of the worst degree. So from their first encounter at Texas Fishing Hole, there's an incident at the fishing hole. Fred Fly does what he does. He litters it up, and then Tex chases him across Texas. It's funny. There's a posse that gets involved and helps to bring the fly to justice. There's some old cowboy references and there's old West references. See, the posse is there's an armadillo, there's a snake, there's a turtle. Those are his three biggest supporters, basically. So he has to deputize them and put them into service. The cowboys, unfortunately, they're less effective. So he doesn't actually use them. They just sit around and kind of complain about not being able to catch Fred Fly. So they're not much help. But the posse kind of gives Tex the motivation to kind of keep chasing him and keeps him in shape. So as a result of their efforts, obviously, he gets to re-encounter. He has encounters with the fly in different places, right? You run into him. They have a battle, if you want to call it, and then keeps going. But ultimately, you want good to prevail. Even though Fred might have some qualities that you might like, he's still not a good guy. So he gets what he gets. And at the very end of the book, just because I went through a lot of creative writing classes and things like that, there is some reference back to inside of the book. There are a lot of literary references to kind of help young readers understand that there's more to just rhymes than the rhyme themselves, and that there may be things embedded in that. So we try to teach a little bit too. So in addition to the teaching message of, about litter bug and not, don't be a litter bug, we want to influence kids early that they can instill a position on that, and maybe even an active position where they start to help in their communities with pickup drives and things like that. But they also learn some of the literary things, so that if they decide to become a writer, they can be a reader and a writer. They can actually start to discriminate when they see things in writing and realize that, some things are being used that are effective and get the message across.
So give me an example of the literary reference.
Alliteration. I've always been fascinated with alliteration. So the repeating consonant sounds in words, when you tie something together, it helps create an emphasis on that moment. So, if you use, Fred Fly in itself is the beginning of alliteration, but if you put, Fred Fly, freed flies, it's a bit of a tongue twister, but at the same time, it also creates a point of accentuation in the book. And so there's quite a bit of alliteration in the book. There's onomatopoeia, slogans and things like that. So the idea is at the end of the book, it tells what these things are, and then it challenges the kids to go back and find them. in the book. And then, it, obviously it gives them the answer at the very end, but it lets them go look for these kind of things in the book. And by doing that, they study it a little bit more. So it can be used as a reader as well as a teaching aid. So I've got my first reading is coming up here. When the city council is going to be reading it to the school where my kids went, actually, which is pretty exciting because he's got a great voice. He sings opera. So really looking forward to hearing him do that reading.
Is he a friend of yours that offered to do this for you, or what happened?
He is my kids. He used to run this smoothie shop, and my oldest worked there. And so he was very musical. So the kids, when they would get done working, they'd take out their guitars and they write songs. That's actually where Castaway Radio kind of got its start, because they used to play gigs over at the drink station. So Adrian ran that. Well, then later on, he ended up going into politics and became city council, and he'll probably be a senator before it's all over with. But yeah, so he's been my kid's first boss both times because both of them work there. So yeah, he's a friend of the family.
That's great, because that's the hardest thing sometimes, is to find a place where you can actually read your book.
I am, and I've got two other famous people I'm going after. We'll see if I can get them that are absolute Texans that I want to read it. And then if I can get them behind it, then that would be great. And ironically, both of them are affiliated with the Don't Mess with Texas campaign. So that there's a pretty good shot at it. So we'll see how that works out.
If you can get this affiliated with the Don't Mess with Texas campaign, you're on your way.
Yeah, I would hope so. Yeah, I think so. And I even think the second book is that's where it's like, wow, you got so much emphasis. I love this book. It's a great book. I want that to be a self-succeeding Texan thing. But at the end of the day, too, I was like, man, because I'm from North Carolina. I'm like, I haven't done anything for my state. So,
well, get on that, Lawrence.
I know. I need to get on that one. Yeah, I got 2 other states to go before I get to that one. So
okay. Sounds like a plan. You got a great thing going here.
Yeah, I think so.
Any advice for anybody who's listening who wants to write?
Oh, well, it depends on what they want to write. I think everybody probably has a natural tendency to a category of some kind, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're either predisposed to be a detailed, fiction writer, or in my case, I like poems, I like rhymes and things like that. So you first got to kind of know what it is you like. And it's okay to benchmark stuff. So then if you do read in those categories or whatever, when we write songs, I mean, we kind of always laugh about it. It feels like most songs, really great songs that come around, you kind of hear pieces of old songs in them. It's not unusual that you're going to be influenced by people that you've read. So I would just say, if they were really serious about it, you'd want to read up in the categories you're really, really familiar with, and and then pattern some of that, and then see if that turns into a style of your own. Then yeah, it's worth pursuing. If it doesn't, then buy tickets and go see the people you like.
Okay.
Don't put something out just to say you wrote a book. I think there's too much out there that's sadly is maybe not really that inspired. They're doing it to write the book, and they're not doing it to get the message out. And I think there's got to be a message worth sending.
Lawrence, that's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, because I read all your questions and I was like kind of ready for them, but then I think I kind of said most of everything you asked about. And
it's got to sound like a conversation. It can't be question number 1, question number 2.
Yeah.
We can't do that. I just want you to talk about your book and be familiar with it.
I was hoping you were going to ask me about the writing method, and I guess you kind of did. But I'd written something I thought was kind of funny, but maybe I won't write that one. But it is about the fact that it's when you're writing this kind of stuff, it doesn't all come out at once. You have to put it away. And I guess maybe taking 20 years isn't the worst thing.
No, absolutely not. Because you got to go back and revisit and change, revise, back, revisit. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, all right.
Thanks, Lawrence.
My best friend's mom was my mentor. So she was a bookworm, and I miss that lady. But I think that's really kind of what it all comes down to. I wish, if there's one thing I wish that my friends' parents could read this.
Well, maybe somewhere they are.
Maybe somewhere they are. Okay. All right. Well,
you have a great day.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. We hope to see you back here every Saturday night at 8 o'clock, or listen to our podcast anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, just to name a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where independent new authors come first.